The rain in New York City was coming down hard, turning the sidewalks into mirrors reflecting the blurry streetlights. Inside a small, warm bistro, tucked away on a quiet side street, the atmosphere was completely different. It was cozy and smelled heavily of garlic, fresh bread, and roasted tomatoes. The place was bustling with the chatter of couples and families, the clinking of silverware against plates providing a steady background rhythm. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear for a little while, to enjoy a good meal and forget about the cold world outside. The door chimed and a tall figure stepped inside. Shaking a few droplets of water from a dark leather jacket, he pulled his hood down, revealing a face that was instantly familiar to almost everyone in the room, yet he carried himself as if he were invisible. It was Keanu Reeves. He didn't have an entourage, no bodyguards flanking him, and no camera crew documenting his every move. He was alone. He paused for a moment by the door, scanning the room not with arrogance, but with a quiet hesitation, looking for a spot where he wouldn't be a bother. A hostess, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, walked up to him. She froze for a split second, her eyes widening in recognition, but she quickly composed herself. "Just one tonight, sir?" she asked, her voice steady, though her hands fiddled slightly with the menus. Keanu nodded, offering a soft, apologetic smile. "Yes, please. Just me. Do you have a corner somewhere? Out of the way?" "Of course," she said. She led him through the maze of tables, past diners who were mid-conversation. As he walked, a hush seemed to follow him, like a wave rolling through the restaurant. People stopped eating for a second, their forks hovering in midair. It wasn't a mob scene. No one stood up to scream his name. Instead, it was a collective realization. Heads turned. Whispers started immediately. "Is that? It looks like him. Wow, it's really him." Keanu seemed to sense the attention, but chose to ignore it, keeping his head down and his shoulders relaxed. He slid into a small wooden table in the back corner, away from the main traffic. It was a tight squeeze, but he seemed grateful for the walls pressing in around him. He sat down and let out a long, slow breath, the tension of the day leaving his body. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that settles in your bones after years of hard work and life experience. A waiter approached the table. It was a young man with a notebook in hand. He looked nervous. He cleared his throat. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink?" Keanu looked up, his eyes meeting the waiter's. There was no impatience there, only warmth. He didn't look at his phone or check his watch. He gave the young man his full attention. "I'll just have water, please," Keanu said, "and maybe a glass of red wine. Whatever you recommend is fine." The waiter relaxed a fraction. "Absolutely. And for food? The special tonight is the pappardelle with wild boar ragu. It's excellent." "That sounds perfect," Keanu replied. "I'll take that." As the waiter walked away, Keanu rested his elbows on the table and looked around the room. He watched the families laughing, the couples holding hands across the table. There was a genuine curiosity in his gaze, as if he were studying the human condition from his corner booth. He didn't put on headphones or stare at a screen. He just sat there, present in the moment. The buzz in the restaurant slowly began to rise again, but it had changed. Now there was a subtle energy focused on the corner. Two women at a nearby table were stealing glances, giggling nervously whenever he looked their way. A businessman at the bar was pretending to watch the game on the TV above, but his eyes kept drifting to the mirror to catch a reflection of the actor. It was strange to see someone so famous blending so thoroughly into the background. He wasn't demanding attention. In fact, he seemed to be actively repelling it with a humble force field. When the waiter returned with the wine, Keanu thanked him sincerely, looking him in the eye. "Thank you for the recommendation. I appreciate it." "You're very welcome, sir," the waiter said, beaming. Keanu took a sip of wine and then a piece of bread, chewing slowly. He looked incredibly ordinary in that moment, just a man enjoying his dinner. He didn't carry the air of a Hollywood billionaire who owned the city. He sat with his legs tucked under the chair, posture slightly slumped. Wearing clothes that looked comfortable and well-worn, If you didn't know who he was, you might have thought he was just another guy grabbing a bite after a long shift. The minutes ticked by. The rain continued to pound against the glass window, distorting the world outside into streaks of light and dark. Inside, the safety of the restaurant wrapped around everyone. For Keanu, this was likely a rare moment of peace. No scripts to memorize, no stunts to perform, no interviews to endure. Just the simple pleasure of a glass of wine and the anticipation of a hot meal. He watched a father at a nearby table cut up food for his toddler, a small smile playing on Keanu's lips as the child made a mess. It was a look of nostalgia, perhaps, or just appreciation for the simple, chaotic beauty of normal life. He seemed to crave this normalcy. While most people in his position might be offended by the stares and the whispers, he didn't seem to mind. He understood that with his job came a certain loss of anonymity, and he accepted it with a grace that was disarming. The waiter brought out the pasta, steaming hot and smelling rich. Keanu's face lit up. "Wow, that looks amazing," he said, more to himself than the waiter. He picked up his fork, twirled the pasta, and took the first bite. He closed his eyes for a second, savoring it. It was a simple, human reaction to good food, devoid of any pretense around him. The other diners continued their meals, but the mood of the room remained charged with the presence of the star. Everyone was respecting his space, obeying the unspoken rule of the city: give the man his dinner. He was a ghost in plain sight, famous to everyone, yet sitting alone in the corner, enjoying a quiet moment of respite. No one knew yet that this ordinary dinner was about to turn into something much deeper. A moment that would remind everyone watching why this man was so beloved. Not for his movies, but for his heart. But for now, it was just a man, a bowl of pasta, and the rain. The soft chime of the restaurant door rang out again, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking cutlery and low murmurs. A young couple stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with them that made the warm lights of the bistro feel even cozier. They looked to be in their early 20s, dressed nicely, but not expensively, perhaps saving up for a few months just to have a proper night out in the city. The man held the door open for his partner, guiding her in with a gentle hand on her back. They were laughing about something, their faces flushed from the cold wind outside, clearly happy just to be in each other's company. The hostess greeted them and looked around the busy room. The only available spot was the small table right next to the corner booth where Keanu was sitting. She led them over, weaving through the crowded space. As they approached the corner, the couple was so wrapped up in their own conversation that they didn't even notice the famous actor sitting just a few feet away. They were too busy looking at the menu on the wall and discussing what they could afford to order. They sat down, shuffling their chairs in the cramped space. The table was small, and they had to navigate carefully to avoid bumping into the booth behind them. Keanu glanced up briefly, gave a small, polite nod, and then returned his eyes to his pasta, carefully creating a bubble of privacy so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable sitting next to a stranger. The couple settled in, removing their scarves and coats. The woman had a large, slouchy purse that she struggled to find a place for. The floor was wet from the tracked-in rain, and the table was crowded with salt and pepper shakers and a small vase. Finally, she hooked the strap over the back of her chair, thinking it would be safe there. She sighed happily, looking across the table at her partner. "I'm so glad we finally did this," she said, her voice full of relief. "It feels like forever since we had a real dinner."
"Me too,"
the man replied, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "You deserve it." They spent the next few minutes looking over their menus, whispering to each other about prices and ingredients. It was sweet, the kind of simple, domestic intimacy that makes a restaurant feel like a home. They were completely unaware that they were dining next to one of the most famous actors in the world. Keanu continued to eat slowly, occasionally taking a sip of his wine, blending perfectly into the background scenery. Then disaster struck. It happened in slow motion. The woman shifted her weight, perhaps trying to get more comfortable, or maybe her foot caught the long strap of her purse. Suddenly, the bag tipped over. It didn't just fall, it spilled open. Because of the way it landed, the contents tumbled out onto the floor and slid across the wooden planks. A wallet skittered away. A set of keys clattered loudly. A pack of tissues burst open, and a tube of lipstick rolled with a distinct clicking sound. heading straight under Keanu's table. The noise was startling in the quiet corner. The woman gasped, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. The color drained from the man's face as he realized how much attention they had drawn. "Oh no, I am so sorry," the woman stammered, immediately ducking down to grab her things. She looked mortified, her eyes scanning the floor frantically. It was that specific type of embarrassment where you feel like everyone in the room is staring at you, judging your clumsiness. She wanted the floor to just open up and swallow her whole. The man jumped up to help, knocking his own napkin onto the floor in the process. "I've got it, don't worry," he said, though his voice was tight with stress. He reached for the wallet, trying to block the view of the other diners, before either of them could react.
Ow.
A movement from the booth caught their eye. Keanu Reeves had set down his fork. He didn't look annoyed. He didn't roll his eyes or sigh at the interruption. Without a moment's hesitation, he slid out of his seat and crouched down on the floor next to them. He didn't stand above them. He got down to their level. The woman froze, her hand hovering over a compact mirror. She watched, stunned. As the actor reached under his own table to retrieve the tube of lipstick that had rolled far out of her reach, he grabbed it, dusted it off slightly against his pants, and then reached for the pack of tissues that had slid near his feet. He gathered the items in his hand and turned to the woman, offering them to her with a soft, genuine smile. There was no look of, "I am a movie star helping a peasant." It was just one human being helping another. "Here you go," Keanu said quietly. His voice was calm and reassuring, cutting through her anxiety instantly. "I think we got everything." The woman stared at him, her brain trying to process what was happening. She saw the familiar face, the gentle eyes, and the kind smile. She took the lipstick and the tissues from his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I am so sorry. I made such a mess." Keanu shook his head, waving off the apology as he stood up slowly. He waited until she had gathered the rest of her things and placed them back on the table. He didn't rush her. He stood there patiently, his hands in his pockets, looking completely at ease. "Don't worry about it," he said, looking at both of them. "It happens to everyone. Really, no harm done." He waited until they sat back down, looking slightly flustered but okay. He gave them a small nada signal that everything was fine and then sat back down in his own booth. He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and went back to his meal. Acting as if the whole thing never happened, the couple sat there for a moment, looking at each other. The adrenaline of the embarrassment was fading, replaced by a sudden, dawning realization. The woman leaned in close to her partner, her eyes wide as saucers. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes darting back to the man in the corner who was quietly twirling pasta on his fork. Is that who I think it is?" Her partner looked over, really looking at the man for the first time. He saw the profile, the hair, the way he held himself. The man's jaw dropped slightly. "Oh my goodness," he mouthed silently. "It is." They sat in stunned silence for a moment. They had just made a fool of themselves in front of a Hollywood legend, and instead of being arrogant or ignoring them, he had knelt on the floor to pick up their trash. The woman couldn't stop looking at him. He was just eating his dinner, completely unbothered, radiating a sense of peace that was almost foreign in the busy city. The atmosphere at their table had changed completely. The initial tension of the spill was gone, replaced by a warm, buzzing feeling. They weren't just on a date anymore. They were part of a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The fear of bothering him began to melt away, replaced by a curiosity and a deep respect for the stranger sitting next to them. The man squeezed his partner's hand under the table, signaling her to stay calm, but the excitement in the air was undeniable. The ordinary dinner had just taken a turn into something extraordinary, and it was all because of one simple, kind act. The woman sat frozen in her chair, her fingers still tightly wrapped around the tube of lipstick the actor had just handed back to her. It felt warm, as if it held the residual heat of his kindness. For a long moment, neither she nor her partner spoke. They just looked at each other, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. The restaurant noise seemed to rush back in all at once, the clattering dishes, the murmuring voices butt to them. The little corner of the room felt like a vacuum where time had stopped. "I can't believe that just happened," the young man whispered, leaning across the small table. He had a goofy, shocked grin on his face, the kind that appears when you meet a childhood hero in the flesh. He actually got on the floor. "He didn't have to do that," the woman nodded, glancing over at the booth. Keanu had gone back to his meal, acting as if retrieving strangers' belongings was a normal part of his dinner routine. He was twirling pasta with his fork, completely at ease. He's really nice," she said softly. "I mean, everyone says he's nice, but you always think it's just a PR thing. But he seems so real." The couple watched him for a minute, trying to be subtle about it. It was fascinating to see someone so famous acting so ordinary. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking around to see if people were looking at him. He was just enjoying the food. Every now and then, he would take a sip of wine and look out the rainy window, looking thoughtful and peaceful. It was strange to realize that he was just a person like them, dealing with his own thoughts, enjoying a quiet night out. "We should say something," the man said finally. He shifted in his seat, his nervousness returning. "We can't just sit here next to him all night and pretend we don't know who he is. That feels weirder than saying hello." The woman hesitated. She looked at Keanu's peaceful face and frowned slightly. "I don't know. He's eating. What if he's tired? What if he just wants to be left alone? I would hate to be the one who ruins his night." "He helped you pick up your purse," the man pointed out. "If he wanted to be left alone, he wouldn't have been that nice. He's a human being. If someone did something nice for me, I'd want to talk to them." They went back and forth like this for a few minutes, weighing their desire to express their admiration against their fear of being annoying. It was a dilemma every fan faces when seeing a celebrity in the wild. The line between being a respectful observer and an intrusive fan can be thin, and they desperately wanted to stay on the right side of it. Eventually, the man took a deep breath and wiped his palms on his napkin. He squared his shoulders. "Okay, I'm going to do it. I'll just keep it short. I won't ask for a selfie or anything. I'll just tell him we love his work. That's harmless, right? Just be polite," the woman said, giving him an encouraging nod. "And if he looks like he wants to stop, we stop immediately." The man stood up. His legs felt a little shaky as he turned toward Keanu's table. The 2 steps it took to reach the booth felt like the longest walk of his life. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He could see the top of Keanu's head as the actor took a bite of garlic bread. Keanu must have sensed the movement, because he looked up just as the man reached the side of the table. He didn't look annoyed. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes. He simply stopped chewing, swallowed, and looked up with those dark, attentive eyes. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and offered a small, welcoming smile. "Hi there," Keanu said. His voice was low and raspy, sounding exactly like it did in the movies, but softer. "Hi," the man managed to squeak out. He cleared his throat, trying to sound normal. "I am so sorry to bother you while you're eating. I know it's rude to interrupt, but, well, we're sitting right there, and I just wanted to say hello." Keanu waved his hand dismissively, setting the man at ease instantly. "No bother at all. Please, don't worry about it." The man relaxed a fraction. Seeing that Keanu wasn't going to shut him down gave him a burst of courage. "Okay, great. I just wanted to tell you that I'm a huge fan. I mean, we both are. My partner and I, we've seen everything you've done. From The Matrix to John Wick. Honestly, your movies got me through some really tough times when I was younger. You have no idea how much your work means to us." As the man spoke, he saw a change in Keanu's expression. It wasn't a fake celebrity smile. It was a look of genuine humility and appreciation. The actor listened intently, not looking away or checking to see if anyone else was watching. He took the compliment to heart. "Thank you," Keanu said, nodding slowly. That is really kind of you to say. I appreciate you telling me that, truly." The man smiled, feeling a warm rush of happiness. "Yeah, it's an honor to meet you. You're even cooler in person than you are on screen." Keanu let out a small, humble chuckle and shook his head. "I don't know about that. I'm just a guy eating pasta. But thank you." He reached out his hand across the table. The man eagerly took it, shaking his hand. It was a firm, solid handshake, real and grounding. "Enjoy your dinner," Keanu said, holding the eye contact for a second longer to show he meant it. And the pasta here is actually excellent. You should try it if you come back. I definitely will, the man laughed. Thanks again. With that, the man felt the interaction naturally coming to a close. He didn't want to push his luck. He smiled one last time and turned back to his own table. As he sat down, he let out a huge breath he felt like he'd been holding for 5 minutes. The woman looked at him expectantly. Well, how was it? He's amazing, the man breathed, looking over at Keanu with stars in his eyes. He shook my hand. He actually listened. He wasn't just being polite. He was actually grateful. I didn't ask for a photo because it didn't feel right, but just talking to him was enough. Keanu, meanwhile, had picked up his fork again. He took a bite of his food, glancing over at them with a quick, friendly nod before returning his attention to his plate. He seemed content, happy that the interaction had been positive and brief. It was the perfect exchange. The fans got to express their love. The star got to keep his dignity and his dinner. The couple looked at each other, grinning. They felt a secret bond with the rest of the room now, a shared knowledge that they were sitting near greatness. But as they looked at him, quietly chewing his dinner, they realized something else. Despite his fame, he seemed like a lonely figure, carrying a weight that wasn't visible on the surface. The man's excitement began to settle into something deeper, curiosity. He watched Keanu staring out the window at the rain again. The actor looked peaceful, yes, but there was a sadness in his eyes that made the young man pause. He felt a sudden urge to ask him something real, something that went beyond movie talk. He looked at his partner and saw the same thought flickering across her face. They had a chance to ask a question that really mattered. But could they? Would that be crossing the line? The warm glow of the restaurant had settled into a comfortable rhythm by the time the couple finished their meal. The plates were cleared away, leaving only a few crumbs and the stain of sauce where the pasta had been. The man looked at the check the waiter had placed on the table, calculating the tip in his head, but his mind wasn't really on the money. It kept drifting back to the man sitting just a few feet away from him. That brief interaction, the handshake, the humble thank you had stirred something inside the young man. He looked over at Keanu again. The actor was almost done with his food, pushing a final piece of bread around his plate. He looked peaceful, but there was a heaviness to him, stillness that spoke of a man who had carried many heavy burdens in his life. It wasn't a depressing vibe, just a deep, quiet reserve. The young man knew the stories. Everyone did. He knew about the losses Keanu had suffered, the tragic kind that breaks a person completely. He knew that behind the action star persona and the internet memes was a man who had walked through some very dark valleys. And yet, sitting there in the warm light, Keanu didn't look broken. He looked solid. He looked kind. The man looked at his partner. She was sipping the last of her water, watching him with a curious expression. She could tell his brain was working overtime. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, leaning in so the neighboring tables wouldn't hear. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. It's just meeting him, seeing how he is. It makes you think. We talk about movies and stunts, but looking at him, he just seems so present, so grounded. He seems like a good guy," she agreed, the man said firmly. "But I know he's been through hell. More than most people could handle. And yet here he is. Eating dinner? Being nice to strangers who spill their purses? He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "I just feel like if I don't ask him something real, I'll regret it. Not an autograph or a photo. Something that actually matters." The woman looked at him with a mixture of concern and understanding. She knew he had been struggling lately too. Work had been stressful, and the future felt uncertain sometimes. She squeezed his hand. "You can try, but you have to be careful. Don't make it an interview. Make it human." The man nodded slowly. His heart began to beat faster again, a nervous flutter in his chest. Asking for a selfie was easy. Asking a famous actor for life advice was terrifying. What if Keanu got offended? What if he told him to get lost? But looking at the quiet figure in the booth, the man didn't think he would. He took a deep breath, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans for the second time that night. He stood up. It was now or never. They were finished with their meal, and if they waited any longer, the moment would be gone. He walked over to the booth. Keanu was just taking his final sip of wine. When he saw the young man approaching again, the actor didn't look annoyed. He paused, resting his arm on the table, ready for another interaction. He probably expected a request for a photo now that the ice had been broken. "Hey," Keanu said, offering that same gentle, crooked smile. "Everything okay with the food?" "Yes, it was perfect," the young man said. His voice sounded a little shaky, and he cleared his throat to steady it. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't step closer to invade the actor's space. Instead, he stood respectfully at the edge of the table, looking at Keanu with intense sincerity. "I know I already bothered you," the man started, "and I promise I'll let you get back to your night after this. I have a question, and it's not about movies." Keanu's expression shifted slightly. The polite mask of a celebrity meeting a fan faded away, replaced by a look of acute attention. He sat up a little straighter. His eyes locked onto the young man's face. The air around the booth seemed to get heavy, as if the noise of the restaurant was being blocked out by an invisible wall. "'Kay," Keanu said softly. "Go ahead." The young man took a breath. He felt vulnerable, exposed, like he was opening a door to his own heart. "I've had a really rough couple of years," he admitted. "I know a lot of people go through tough times, and I look at you and I know what you've been through in your life. The loss, the pain. Everyone knows the stories." He paused, making sure not to be disrespectful, but needing Keanu to know he was speaking from the heart. "But when I look at you, I don't see someone who is angry or bitter. I see someone who is peaceful. I see someone who is still kind. I just wonder," the man's voice cracked slightly, "how do you do it? When the world is so heavy and things go so wrong, how do you keep going? How do you stay happy?" It was a quiet question, but it hung in the air between them like a heavy weight. It wasn't a question a fan asked a movie star. It was a question a human being asked another human being, who had walked through the fire and survived. The nearby tables seemed to sense the shift in mood. The laughter from a few booths away died down. The waiter, who was walking past with a coffee pot, slowed his steps, pretending to be busy with a nearby station so he could listen. It was one of those rare moments where time seems to stand still in a public place, where a private moment of depth creates a ripple of silence. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the table for a moment, processing the question. He didn't treat it lightly. He didn't give a canned response. He took it seriously. He thought about the losses, the years of grief, the nights that felt endless. Then he looked back up at the young man. The actor's face was serious, but his eyes were incredibly soft. There was no defensive wall there. He didn't shut down. Instead, he leaned in slightly, bridging the gap between them. Keanu began, his voice low and thoughtful. "That is a very big question." He let out a small, sad breath, but then a hint of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but a real one. "And I don't know if I have a perfect answer, but I can tell you what I've learned." The young man held his breath. The whole restaurant seemed to lean in, waiting for the wisdom to drop. Keanu took a slow breath, the kind of breath you take when you are reaching down into the deepest part of yourself to find the truth. He didn't look away. He didn't look at the table or the window. He kept his eyes locked on the young man's face, treating him with a level of seriousness that made the young man feel like he was the only person in the room. "I think people make a mistake about happiness," Keanu began, his voice soft and raspy, barely carrying over the noise of the restaurant. "We treat it like a destination, like if we work hard enough, or if we buy the right things, or if we get famous enough, we will reach this place called happy, and we will just stay there forever." He shook his head slightly, a sad wisdom in his eyes. "But that's not how it works. Happiness isn't a permanent state. It comes and it goes. It's like the weather. You can have a sunny day, but the clouds will come back eventually. That's just life. You can't force the sun to shine 24 hours a day." The young man nodded slowly, hanging on every word. He felt a lump forming in his throat because he knew exactly what Keanu meant. He had been chasing that permanent state of happiness for years, thinking that if he just got the right job or the right apartment, Everything would be fixed. When you lose people, Keanu continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even more intimate. When you suffer real tragedy, the world breaks a little. You realize that nothing is promised. You realize that the sunny day can end in a second. He paused, glancing at the woman sitting at the table, including her in the conversation. She leaned forward, her eyes wide and glistening. But here's the thing, Keanu said, leaning in slightly, his expression intensifying. You don't need to be happy all the time. That is too much pressure. No one is happy all the time. What you need, what gets you through, is purpose. He tapped his chest lightly with his hand. If you have people in your life who you love and who love you back, hold on to them. That is enough. If you have work that means something to you, whether it's acting, or working in an office, or painting pictures, do that with all your heart. That is enough. The silence at the table was absolute. The waiter stood frozen by the counter, holding a coffee pot, pretending to be busy so he could listen. Even the couple at the next table had stopped talking, captivated by the quiet wisdom coming from the corner booth. You just have to keep waking up, Keanu said, his voice firming up. You put one foot in front of the other. You take it one day at a time. Sometimes when it's really bad, you take it 1 hour at a time. You don't have to fix your whole life tonight. You just have to get through today. He looked at the young man, and for a second, a faint, genuine smile broke through the serious mask. And you try to find gratitude, even in the small things. For this meal, for the rain outside, for the stranger who helps you pick up your purse. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about being grateful for the moment you are in right now. The young man blinked, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, laughing nervously. He looked at his partner, and she was wiping her eyes too. It wasn't a sad cry. It was a cry of relief. They felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off their shoulders. They didn't need to have everything figured out. They just needed to keep going. Thank you, the young man whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for telling me that. I really needed to hear it. Keanu reached out and squeezed the young man's shoulder firmly. You're going to be okay, he said. Just keep walking. The couple sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. They realized they were staring, and they didn't want to ruin the moment by getting too emotional. They both stood up slowly. Have a wonderful night and thank you for dinner, the woman said softly. And thank you for talking to us. Enjoy the pasta, Keanu replied, nodding warmly. He watched them gather their coats. As they turned to leave, he didn't immediately look back at his wine. He watched them go, a look of genuine care on his face, hoping that his words had helped them even a little bit. As the couple walked toward the door, the restaurant felt different to them. The air seemed lighter. They walked out into the cold rain, but they didn't mind it. They held hands tight, feeling a new sense of strength. They weren't just two people struggling anymore. They were two people who had been reminded that the struggle was part of the journey. Back inside, Keanu signaled for the waiter. The waiter hurried over, still feeling a bit buzzed from the conversation he had overheard. He placed the check face down on the table. Is everything all right, sir? The waiter asked, feeling a boldness he wouldn't normally feel. Can I get you anything else? No, this was perfect, Keanu said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out some cash. He didn't just pay the bill. He placed a stack of bills under the salt shaker. From the thickness of the stack, the waiter could tell it was far more than the cost of the meal. It was a massive tip, the kind that changes a server's week. You do great work, Keanu said quietly to the waiter, looking him in the eye. Take care of yourself. The waiter stood there, stunned. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sir, this is too much. Keanu just shook his head. It's not too much. Enjoy your evening. He stood up, pulling his hood back up over his head. He didn't make a big scene of leaving. He didn't wave goodbye to the room. He just checked his pockets to make sure he had his keys and walked toward the door. He moved with that same quiet, deliberate pace he had when he entered, as he pushed the door open and stepped out into the rainy New York night. The cold air hit him. He didn't shrink away from it. He embraced it, walking down the street, disappearing into the shadows like a ghost. Inside the restaurant, the waiter walked over to the table to clear it. He lifted the salt shaker, and his jaw dropped. It wasn't just a good tip. It was an incredible amount of money. The waiter looked around the room, his eyes wide, catching the gaze of the busboy. "That guy," the waiter whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "He's not just a movie star." The couple who had been sitting nearby leaned in. "We heard what he told that young couple," one of them said softly. "I've never seen anything like that. He's real." The restaurant buzzed with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the excitement of a celebrity sighting anymore. It was the feeling of having witnessed something rare and beautiful. They hadn't just seen a man eat pasta. They had seen a man who carried a great deal of pain, yet chose to use that pain to lift others up. He had given a young couple hope. He had rewarded a hard-working waiter. And he had left without asking for a single thing in return. As the rain continued to fall outside, the warm restaurant felt a little brighter, a little kinder. All because of a quiet question and a humble answer.